I am Wayne Young. I'm the CEO of the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD, and this is the Benefits of Family and Peers breakout track, okay? Our first presenter is Jerri Clark, a Family Resource and Advocacy Manager for the Treatment Advocacy Center. You might remember her presentation from last year's summit. I know I certainly do. Both of them, was so impactful that they asked her to do an encore. And I sat on the edge of my seat for both of those. It was so impactful and so moving to hear her thoughts and comments. So I'm excited that she's here again. Her presentation this year will blend her personal experience with her son's serious mental illness and professional insights gained from working with families nationwide to highlight the essential role of family care partners. Welcome, Jerri.
Last year at this summit, I spoke about family engagement to improve SMI outcomes. By SMI, I mean schizophrenia and severe mood disorders that come with psychosis. Thank you for welcoming me back to talk about SMI and the evolving role of family care partners. If you heard me last year, you know that my son did not survive his SMI. After 4 years of churning through incarcerations, homelessness, and small bits of inadequate care, he took his life by jumping from a hotel rooftop in 2019. He was 23. I emerged from despair, determined to advocate for a better system, and went to work for the national nonprofit Treatment Advocacy Center. We call ourselves TAC. TAC is Virginia-based with staff across the United States. I work from my home in Washington State. I'll share more about my story, but first let's look at 2025 realities for 14 million Americans with SMI and their families. For decades, the mental health system has been under-resourced with too few treatment beds, too few community programs, and too few specialists. The shortages often push people into primary care settings that are poorly equipped to serve their needs, or worse, into homelessness and the criminal system. Jails and prisons house 10 times more people with SMI than state hospitals. In Texas, that ratio is 24-1. New cuts to federal programs forebode a bleak future. Looming Medicaid cuts will decimate treatment access, with 10% of people on public insurance experiencing SMI. Families try mightily to pick up the slack. We provide housing and unpaid care management. We track prescriptions, appointments, and court dates. When a loved one lands in jail, justice is difficult to pursue, but we try anyway. We take a lot of abuse when psychosis confuses our loved ones and they believe we are imposters, spies, or oppressors. We do our best to see past the illness and lean into love. Families advocate for treatment when an unwell loved one cannot see that their own brain is misleading them. A young man with schizoaffective disorder said this: "When I'm not doing well, my mom knows me better than I know myself." Today, I'm going to describe 10 ways that you might uplift the hard work of families. But first, I have some stories to share. Here's an example of family engagement that missed its mark. A young man with schizophrenia is incarcerated in Texas and doing poorly. A district attorney offered a deal. Case dismissed if mom gets son a hospital bed. Here is mom's struggle. Her psychotic son has physically harmed her because of his delusions, not for reality-based reasons. There's been no assessment while his symptoms have worsened in jail. No medical transport agency will help. Mom would have to pick him up and take him to a hospital with no appointment, no promise of a bed, and all of the risks and liabilities. A mom's love and willpower cannot make this offer workable or even safe. Before I say more, I kind of want to know who's in the room. So, if you are a judge, raise your hand. Awesome, thank you for being here. How about defense attorneys? There's no defense. How about prosecuting attorneys? Awesome. Social workers? Awesome. Other folks who work in the courts somewhere? Awesome. Other providers? Excellent. How about any family members of someone with an SMI? So glad you're here. Peers, individuals who have experienced an SMI. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. If I did not include you, I apologize. Raise your hand if you're something else. Hey, I captured everybody. Okay, we got one something else. Thank you so much. The picture on the left was taken 15 months before my son died. It was Christmas Eve, 2017. After that cloudy sundown hike, we watched snowfall from my son's Seattle church. He was pretty unstable, but we adapted and had a pretty good Christmas. We tried so hard to be a family. I baked cookies, took him shopping. Nearly a year later, at his 23rd birthday dinner, his final one, he described voices that were cruel and demeaning. They never stop, Mom. I watched my son disappear behind his eyes. When mania ruled, he walked the city all night. I tracked him on my phone. When depression took charge, his location dot didn't move for days. By the time of this picture, Calvin had been in jail. He'd been homeless. A year before this picture, he tried to die by jumping from a highway bridge into a raging winter river. All of those events were about to repeat, but his final landing was concrete, not water. It was so hard to convince professionals to see what I saw. A young man rich with potential if someone would offer real help, but also a haunted person unable to lift himself out of this illness on his own. Standard answers from those who would not help were, he's an adult, or it's not illegal to be psychotic, so there's nothing we can do. Families like mine try to help with our hands bound, including by HIPAA handcuffs. Our help would be so much more potent if we were supported before surviving tragedy, not after. By family, I mean anyone consistently involved in a person's life who is typically trusted. Sadly, delusions and paranoia often attach to a person's most important relationships. If there is convincing evidence that family are abusive, they of course should not be consulted. The problem is when families are presumed unhelpful without anyone bothering to verify what's true. That's my mom with Calvin when he was 18, half a year before his first psychotic break. He was a middle-class college student with a scholarship and a supportive extended family. Turmoil happened because of his illness, but was not its cause. It's not scientifically clear why a person's brain might malfunction, especially while undergoing the structural changes that happen during adolescence and early adulthood. Theories connect SMI to neurotransmitters, genetics, inflammation, infection, brain injury, and substance use. Calvin came home from university convinced our home was overtaken by demons, and he locked a room to contain them. I had never seen psychosis before, and I sat with him through a terrifying night, trying to figure out what on earth he needed me to do. None of this was our family's fault. If I can change one thing in the way that you approach SMI, please let it be that family shaming must stop. To clarify, by SMI, I mean severe mental illness conditions along the schizophrenia and bipolar spectrums, those with psychosis. SMI was the cause of my son's death. He did not commit a crime by taking his life. Please say it this way: he died from suicide. Like at least 25% of people with SMI, Calvin used substances to try to feel better. Combined care for SMI with SUD is a chasm within a continuum of care built of holes. For 26 years, TAC has been dedicated to humane and accessible treatment for the sickest individuals with SMI, those who are vulnerable because their brains are not working correctly, not because they have chosen a bizarre lifestyle. Mental illness is not a choice. TAC shares accurate information to influence laws, policies, and practices system-wide. The biggest SMI treatment barrier is anosognosia. People with this common SMI symptom have no idea that they're sick. They end up in criminal legal messes, homeless, incarcerated, and at risk for early death because the system was never built to account for anosognosia. You cannot talk about what needs to change in the system without discussing anosognosia. So as Professor Shannon just pointed out, Texas did add anosognosia as a civil commitment criteria with Senate Bill 1164, with implementation that began September 1. In reporting this news, the Houston Chronicle featured Walter Macias, who I understand testified for this bill. Walter begged authorities to hospitalize his brother and treat the illness that his brother could not see because of his anosognosia. Walter's brother believed it was his job to defend Earth from aliens. Instead of treatment, a police standoff caused the death of their mother. Walter's brother died in jail. Like Walter, I have held artifacts while a newspaper team asks, what went so terribly wrong? Our stories have a common feature. No intervention was available until the worst had already happened. I hope to read one day that including anosognosia in the Texas treatment standard improves outcomes. I hope other states take similar actions to account for this critically important symptom of illness. I want to briefly address the President's executive order on homelessness. My focus is the issues, not politics. My son was not homeless because of housing costs or shortages. He was homeless because he was too sick to live safely or stably in any home with bills and rules. Keeping him housed required him to access his sanity with treatment. If the executive order inspires an infusion of federal resources for treatment and housing programs, we might see a beneficial shift in the status quo. The response must not perpetuate harm and dehumanization. I work for Tax Advocacy Department. We offer a number of programs, including a boot camp for grassroots advocates who are working towards system change. Our Advocacy Navigator program is for families supporting loved ones with SMI. As a special project, I train families in coping with ambiguous loss, which, if you were here yesterday, you learned is a loss that lacks clarity or resolution. I've written a book about ambiguous loss and coping that I am still working on getting published. Part of my job is supporting TAC's National Helpline for individuals, families, and professionals. Training for providers is a growth area for our department and our organization as we witness what happens when professional training is inadequate. One help seeker worked for half a decade to get his wife with delusions and paranoia engaged in treatment. The medication worked. Her psychosis was controlled. All of the home's wiring, which she destroyed to eradicate perceived surveillance devices, was repaired. The couple spent calm evenings with their elderly dog and celebrated Christmas with their adult children. Then, this woman's primary care doctor stopped prescribing antipsychotic medication, noting an absence of symptoms. The provider didn't consult family and apparently did not understand that the medication was working. Back in psychosis, this woman wrecked her home again and then left to live with extended family overseas, where she's doing poorly while her husband back home grieves. For too long, society has shushed SMI families, warning that to describe the fallout from untreated illness is to stigmatize people who are neurologically special. Please, psychosis is a brain in breakdown, not a gift. Our department wrote this values statement with this final line: "We bravely speak truth about the realities for those impacted as we push for needed system change." I don't sugarcoat true stories, including my own. Suicide is a leading cause of death in persons with SMI, and untreated or undertreated psychosis is a factor in 29% of family homicides. Risks for harm drop to typical numbers when people with SMI are successfully treated. The way to bust stigma is to make sure people in psychosis get treatment, not to accept mental illness as a lifestyle. This is what mental illness steals. Calvin was a debate champion with an heirloom pocket watch as a favorite part of his tournament attire. Throughout his childhood, we camped, surfed, swam. When he was 13, and for the first time taller than me, we hiked to the top of Oregon's famous Multnomah Falls at sunset. That photo is pure joy. The one next to it was after his tether to reality had become tenuous. Under our smiles, there's a lot of tension. He died just a few months later. Evelyn Mercado, a Texas mom, asked me to describe the heartache of a broken parent-child bond. My son was angry because his brain told him lies, she told me, not because of anything I did. Evelyn started Faith Foundation of Texas to advocate for system change. This is about every mother in Texas and beyond, she told me. We are up against a mental health system that fails to respond and a criminal system that punishes instead of heals. Another Texas mom, her son was locked up all summer for something he did during his first episode of psychosis. Because she pleaded, the public defender petitioned for a competency evaluation after more than a month with no action on the case and no intervention. If I had not done that, she said, he would have sat there without evaluation or treatment until his trial. These families are unrelenting, but they don't want your applause. They want you to ease their burden. Families also need your help to stop the shaming, which was normalized from the 1940s through the 1970s when psychiatry theorized that psychosis was caused by schizophrenogenic mothers. Moms are accused of being refrigerators, helicopters, overprotective, enabling, overbearing, aloof. Moms are the most frequent callers to tax helpline. Even those who have been hurt are trying to problem solve. One Texas mom seeks justice for a son arrested for assaulting her after every responder said he wasn't psychotic enough to warrant treatment. I am afraid for his life and the safety of others, she said. I feel powerless. What if the system empowered moms like her? In September, I spoke with a Texas parent whose son has been ill with schizoaffective disorder for 20 years, and he faces a decade in prison. I asked what she wanted you to hear. She said this: people are going into the justice system with these terrible illnesses and coming out so much worse. Her son was first arrested as a teenager at his first onset of a psychotic illness. He stayed in jail through his mid-20s. At one point, a jail provider warned, "You need to figure out how to get him out of here." No mechanism was provided. When he finally came out, his mom said, "We were scared of him. We didn't have any idea what his diagnosis meant." Over the years, his family's support enabled some stability. That ended last year when a provider inexplicably changed his medication. Because of paranoia, he now believes there's a bomb in his cell. He wants a foil hat so aliens cannot read his mind. He has picked holes in his skin, giving himself a severe staph infection. In solitary confinement, he draws deeper into his internal confusion while his mom looks ahead. Once they let him out, we have to fix him, she said. We have to set up his Medicaid, figure out his housing, figure out how he can live in society. I hope these stories have given you a picture of roles the families try to fill. Now I want to share a family wish list, things you might do to help us help. I'll go over each of these. From my vantage point, poor medication management is the most consistent system-wide error that too few stakeholders talk about. This resource, through this QR code on TAC's website, includes a fillable form for a medication log. Please share this with clients, families, providers, anyone who can get more organized about how a person's psychiatric medications are prescribed and monitored. The resource includes global and national best practice standards, which need more widespread dissemination. For example, the standards say to keep prescribing a medication if it's working. The seminal book on communicating with someone who has anosognosia is I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. The author, Dr. Javier Amador, who I understand spoke at a previous summit, developed a motivational method called LEAP, which stands for Listen, Empathize, Agree, and Partner. Families around the world are learning this approach, but their efforts are often stymied by providers unwilling to collaborate. I read this book during my son's final hospitalization, and it was eye-opening. I was enthused to share it, but his provider didn't know the word anosognosia and hung up on me when I tried to explain. That facility discharged my son with an Uber ride to a shelter. He was deeply psychotic and in jail within 6 days. The QR code takes you to a resource with communication tips and places for further training, including the LEAP Institute. Please read and share this information. When a good friend's son was in a coma after a terrible car accident, fear of HIPAA was not an issue. Hospital staff called the family right away, described his grave condition, and discussed care planning. When an emergency condition is brain-based, strict non-disclosure policies seem to be weaponized against families. Despite mental health allowances that are well described in federal guidance. If you're an attorney, there are similar allowances when your professional discretion makes it clear that discussing otherwise confidential information is necessary to protect an incapacitated client's best interests. Please consult your state ethics hotline for further clarification and consider your options before assuming that you cannot talk to family. Imagine how I felt when my son was transported to a state hospital from jail on a dangerously icy day, and the receptionist coldly explained that she could neither confirm nor deny whether my son Calvin had arrived safely. The Office for Civil Rights advises that not only can providers communicate with family, but they are also ethically responsible to share routine and critical information when it is in a patient's best interests. This QR code takes you to an important OCR document that describes HIPAA allowances related to mental health. I hope you will read it and please share it. If there is capacity in your office to develop and share handouts, flowcharts, trial schedules, any basic information to help families understand the court process, it's helpful and it will save you time answering their calls. The video link to this QR code provides foundational information about civil versus criminal courts, easy to share with families. If the family member is a victim, it's helpful if a victim advocate is appointed, and if you explain that their advocate can help them track the case and sometimes communicate with the prosecutor. Our helpline team frequently shares the tool. Somebody opened the video, good job. I don't know why they start talking right away. They do that to me too, yeah. Our helpline team frequently shares a tool for sharing mental health history in a concise format. Please help us distribute this form. Help families know where to share it and who shouldn't see it. Please explain that HIPAA does not block families from sharing information. Please also reassure family that their documents will be considered and appropriately filed, and thank them for sharing what they know. Ask if anyone is a personal representative with guardianship or power of attorney, and request those documents also. Lack of adequate medical services, as you know, in a carceral setting violates the 8th Amendment. There's an article linked to this QR code. Still, protocols to medicate inmates over objection are frustratingly underutilized, and it's common to hear that people die in jail from malnutrition, self-mutilation, or suicide. Jail deaths often happen while a person is waitlisted for competency services. A Texas audit found that at least 54 people died in jail while awaiting treatment between 2018 and 2023. Here's what a jail nurse told a mom whose son with schizophrenia is terrified of food. If he doesn't eat in here, he's gonna starve. Families like mine are begging those with power to please get treatment to our loved ones as soon as possible. While in untreated psychosis, they experience irreversible brain damage. One thing you can do is make sure the family knows what agency is responsible for mental health services in the jail. That way, family can share their history and advocate for treatment. While Calvin was incarcerated, I begged a jail nurse to gain his trust by talking about surfing. It worked. And because Calvin agreed to take medication before a transfer to the state hospital, he was restored to competency more quickly. Sometimes family knows what medication is most likely to restore stability. This valuable information is useless if no one will listen or if the medication that works is not listed on the jail's formulary. If you have sway to expand formularies or can help people file for exceptions, thank you for any action that you might take. At this summit last year, I met Barbara Drumheller, Chief of the Mental Health Division at the Harris County Public Defender's Office. At Barbara's invitation, I spoke in August for the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. Barbara asked whether I've heard of SMI individuals being arrested out of hospitals. Absolutely. It comes up disturbingly often. Texas recently elevated the criminal penalty in cases of provider assault. Medical staff absolutely have a right to workplace safety. But this is a trap that criminalizes people in the moment they finally meet civil commitment criteria. If you are in a role that can impact training to ensure safety under these tricky circumstances, please help. Let's consider the choices that family has when a loved one finally meets the involuntary treatment threshold. That they have to demonstrate that they're likely to cause harm to themselves or someone else, right? That is what everyone's been waiting for. If family calls 911, they're calling a gun. Guns cause panic, lashing out, possibly felony assault charges, or suicide by cop. If family calls 988, the person might make it to a hospital. They have to stay dangerous, though, to get a bed, but not so dangerous that someone gets hurt or police get called after all. Same result as calling 911. Who will be hurt then to enable a hospitalization? I hear this from moms in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and older. I'm going to have to let him hurt me. It is the only way I'll ever get him treatment. I try to make them hear me that their sacrifice won't work. I talk about my friend Teresa, who tried all the ways to get her son treatment before he killed her, believing she was an imposter. Her son is now in custody for life, devastated about what he did because his brain lied to him. What option did Teresa miss? We have a system that requires violence for treatment, but cannot tolerate violence in a treatment setting. Barbara said this: "It seems to me that we continue to create pathways into the criminal system for problems that should be solved medically or through techniques and protocols that come from a treatment perspective. Indeed, we need better protocols, not more arrests." Here's a typical helpline call. A hospital wants family to take the person home, but staff won't share a diagnosis, a treatment plan, or details about the person's functional capacity. The alternative is Uber to a shelter. What's a family supposed to do with those options? Advocates call this mom dumping. Families taking loved ones out of jail face similar blind odds. Shortly after my son turned 21 in jail, I found myself in the surreal position of waiting for him at a grungy bail bonds office across the street from our county jail. Calvin arrived disheveled, with bushy hair and terrible fingernails. But his eyes were kind of clear. I could tell some medication was sort of working. But he didn't have a prescription or any idea what those pills in a cup had been. He didn't need medicine, he explained. He was found competent. I tried to medicate him with older prescriptions. An outpatient appointment a week later was a disaster, with the prescriber stating that his mom should not require medication, his choice. Within a few weeks, my son was lost again behind his eyes, and that was the last time he ever lived with family. The system wanted us to offer our hearts and our home, but offered nothing in return. When a person without insight is hospitalized involuntarily, the safest and most humane discharge might be court-ordered community treatment. I know many of you are working to grow AOT, and I thank you. Please also help families know what AOT is so that they can advocate for it, especially at discharge planning if there is an available program. No one expects you to impart everything families need when they're scared and searching for answers. However, any resource that you offer is better than saying you cannot speak to them. Here are a few shareable resources to support family education, and these slides are included in your conference packet. This downloadable 2-pager describes what families shared at an AOT symposium in San Antonio a few years ago. It's a great list to print and tape to your office wall. The graphic rendering can be a reminder to consider families as allies in your work. What SMI families need is a lot, and nobody can address all of these topics. My hope is that you heard something in my list of 10 things that might be actionable for you. I hope everyone in this room will help us shift toward a more humane and just system for people with SMI. We absolutely mustn't shift toward a more punitive approach. In honor of my son Calvin, thank you for hearing me and for the important work that all of you do with such integrity. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I wanted to save more time for questions, but we do have 3 minutes. Do we get to use that? So if anybody wants to go to a mic and ask a question, we have about 3 minutes. Go for it if you can make your way to a mic. Or just talk really loud if you're far from a mic.
The problem is online.
Oh, gotcha. I'll say it out loud if somebody says it.
Thank you for sharing your story. It was so powerful, and I don't know why they don't have you as an opening speaker as well as the autism mom, because you were outstanding.
Thank you.
Everyone should hear your story. So I have lived experience as well. I have a sister who's been homeless. She's in her 60s, borderline personality disorder, we think. Won't get help, arrested hundreds of times. I feel your pain, and it breaks my heart that my mother left this earth knowing that her daughter, college educated, lived out of her car.
Thank you.
You're right. We have to do more.
We have to do more, and we have to remember always and forever that these illnesses are treatable. The answer is treatment. The answer to a treatable illness is treatment. We've got to figure out how to create pathways into treatment before the illness becomes almost impossible to treat, right?
And I agree with you. In my case, my sister will not. Remember, everyone else is the problem.
Yeah.
And not her. My question for you is, I work with families who are impacted by various disabilities, and this cycle in and out of the psychiatric hospitals makes me sick. There's no discharge plan. The person could be in the hospital for a few days, very little communication. And I realize that you're not the one to answer this, but I wonder if TAC is working with these psychiatric hospitals to work with the families so that their loved ones can get the right help.
Yeah, I mean, we advocate for that all the time. I learned from a commissioner that some of the commissioners visited the Harris Center this week, and there are some long-term beds there, far too few for the state of Texas.
Exactly.
But what an exemplary opportunity to uplift what can work and say, this is what works and saves money.
Right.
This lovely facility is saving money. So keep looking for those pockets of excellence and sharing that information, because people want to hear, what do we need to support? So it's not a gloom and doom, right? If my son had been taken to that facility instead of jail, I believe he would be standing here talking to you today instead of me.
Well, you are an extraordinary mom, and as the single parent of an adult son with autism, who also years ago would have been told I was a refrigerator mother. Yeah.
Thank you for your question, and I can see that I'm over time.
Keep up the great
So
work.
thank you. Thank you for being here.